I've built an empire on the principle that everything has a price. Loyalty, silence, cooperation, all commodities to be negotiated and acquired. In 57 years of life, 30 of them spent navigating the shadowed corridors of power in Chicago, I had never encountered something I couldn't purchase, persuade, or, when necessary, pressure into compliance. Until I met Elena Alves on a Tuesday afternoon in September, when the last gasps of summer heat shimmered off the cracked pavement of her modest neighborhood in Logan Square. I remember every detail of that first encounter, with the clarity of a photograph burned into film. My driver, Dario, had parked the black Mercedes, deliberately unmarked, nothing ostentatious, across the street from a 3-story brick building whose facade bore the weathered dignity of pre-war construction. The address had been verified twice. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. Elena Alves, translator of rare manuscripts, specializing in medieval Portuguese and obscure Renaissance texts. "Boss, you sure about this?" Dario asked, his thick fingers drumming against the steering wheel. He'd been with me for 15 years, long enough to recognize when I was pursuing something outside our usual operations. "We got translators on retainer. Why this particular woman?" "Because she's the best," I replied, adjusting my cufflinks. Simple platinum, nothing gaudy, and checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. At 57, I still commanded a room when I entered it. Silver threaded liberally through my dark hair, but my shoulders remained broad beneath tailored suits, my posture that of a man accustomed to deference. The lines around my eyes and mouth told stories I never spoke aloud, earned through decades of difficult decisions and careful survival. The manuscript I needed translated was a 16th century Portuguese text acquired through channels best left unexamined. It allegedly contained encoded property deeds and financial records that could prove useful. But it required someone with expertise in archaic dialects and historical context, someone discreet, someone I could control. Elena Alves's academic credentials were impeccable. Doctorate from the University of Chicago, publications in obscure scholarly journals, recommendations from professors who spoke of her work with reverence. What made her perfect for my purposes was her isolation. No family in Chicago, few friends, a solitary existence devoted entirely to her translations. Easy to influence, easy to contain. Or so I believed. I climbed the narrow staircase, noting the worn treads and the faint smell of cooking spices, cumin and coriander, seeping from behind closed doors. The building's bones were good, solid construction from an era when craftsmanship mattered, but time and neglect had taken their toll. Paint peeled in the corners. The overhead light flickered uncertainly. Apartment 3B's door was painted a deep forest green, the only one in the hallway with any color. A small brass nameplate read simply, E. Alves. I knocked 3 times, firm but not aggressive, and waited. The woman who opened the door was not what I expected. I had imagined someone severe, bookish in the stereotypical sense, glasses, hair in a tight bun, the slightly hunched posture of someone who spent too many hours bent over ancient texts, academic frumpiness wrapped in cardigans and practical shoes. Elena Alves wore a simple white linen shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Over dark jeans that hugged curves she clearly didn't feel the need to hide or advertise. Her hair, thick, dark, shot through with a few strands of silver she hadn't bothered to conceal, fell loose around her shoulders. No makeup that I could discern, just naturally olive skin and dark eyes that assessed me with immediate, unsettling intelligence. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness. Hers was the beauty of competence, of a woman entirely comfortable in her own skin, unburdened by the need for external validation. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had long ago stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. "Yes?" she asked, one hand remaining on the doorframe, her body positioned to close the door quickly if needed. Cautious, but not fearful. "Ms. Alves, my name is Salvatore Vieira. I apologize for arriving without an appointment, but I have a business proposition that requires discretion and expertise, both of which I understand you possess in abundance." Her dark eyes narrowed slightly, taking in my expensive suit. the subtle bulge where Dario's presence would be just visible if she glanced past me down the hallway, the careful neutrality of my expression that marked me as someone accustomed to concealing intentions. "What kind of business proposition, Mr. Vieira?" I appreciated the directness. "I have a 16th century Portuguese manuscript that requires translation, historical significance, possible encoding of financial records. I need someone who can not only translate the text, but understand the historical context and identify any concealed information. I'm prepared to pay very well for your services and your absolute discretion." Something flickered in her eyes, not greed as I'd expected, but professional interest. She glanced past me, noting Dario's position by the stairwell, then returned her attention to my face. "How well is very well, Mr. Vieira?" I named a figure, 5 times her typical rate for such work, based on my research into her previous projects. Elena's expression didn't change. "That's generous, almost suspiciously generous. What aren't you telling me about this manuscript?" "Its provenance is complicated, but I assure you the work itself is entirely legal. I'm not asking you to do anything criminal, merely to translate a historical document." "Merely," she repeated, a slight smile touching her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "And the discretion you mentioned, what exactly would that entail?" "The manuscript's contents remain confidential. You would work exclusively on this project until completion. No discussion of the text with colleagues, no publication of findings, no retention of copies. Essentially, you want to buy not just my translation services, but my silence and my complete professional isolation for the duration of the project." "Precisely." Elena leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms over her chest. The gesture drew my attention to her hands. No jewelry, nails trimmed short and practical, the fingers of someone who spent hours turning delicate pages. A small scar crossed her left thumb, silvery with age. "Mr. Vieira, I appreciate you coming here personally to make this offer. It shows a certain respect for my time and expertise, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline." The refusal was so unexpected that for a moment I simply stood there, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry," I finally managed. "I'm declining your offer. I'm not interested in the project. Perhaps you didn't hear the compensation I mentioned. I'm prepared to—" "I heard you perfectly well, Choti," she interrupted, her voice remaining calm and courteous. "The money is generous, almost absurdly so, but I don't work under those conditions. Exclusivity, complete silence, no scholarly engagement with the material. That's not translation work, Mr. Vieira. That's complicity in something you're deliberately not explaining. So thank you, but no." I had negotiated with union bosses, politicians, rival organizations. I had faced down men with guns, navigated complex legal challenges, built an empire on my ability to read people and find their pressure points. But this woman, standing in the doorway of her modest apartment, with paint-stained floorboards visible behind her, had just refused me with the same casual politeness one might use to decline an unwanted magazine subscription. "Ms. Alves, I think perhaps you don't understand the opportunity I'm offering. This manuscript is clearly something you obtained through questionable means and need, translated without leaving any trail back to you. I understand perfectly, Mr. Vieira, and my answer is still no." "Everyone has a price," I heard myself say, an old reflex from years of negotiations. Eleanor's smile widened slightly, genuine amusement now lighting her dark eyes. "Do they? How sad for you, believing that. But some of us prefer to keep our dignity and professional integrity off the auction block. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. Good afternoon, Mr. Vieira." She closed the door, not slammed. That would have indicated emotion, anger, fear. Simply closed, with the quiet finality of someone ending an interaction that held no further interest. I stood in that hallway for a full 30 seconds, staring at the forest green door with its brass nameplate, trying to process what had just happened. Dario approached cautiously, his hand hovering near the weapon I knew he carried beneath his jacket. "Boss, everything okay?" "She refused," I said, the words foreign in my mouth. "She wants more money?" "No, she just refused." I walked back down those stairs, climbed into the Mercedes and sat in silence as Dario drove us back toward my office in the Loop. The city scrolled past outside the tinted windows, the familiar landscape of my domain, every block containing businesses that paid tribute, officials who answered my calls, systems I had spent 3 decades learning to manipulate. And somewhere behind us, in a third-floor walk-up apartment, a woman who translated medieval manuscripts for modest fees had just dismissed me without a second thought. "Want me to look into alternatives?" Dario asked as we merged onto the Kennedy Expressway. "Other translators?" "No," I heard myself say. "Not yet." Because something had happened in that brief interaction, something I couldn't quite name. Elena Alves had looked at me, at Salvatore Vieira, who men feared and politicians courted, and seen nothing worth being impressed by, had assessed my offer with her sharp intelligence, and found it wanting not because the price was too low, but because the terms offended her principles. When had anyone last refused me on principle? That night, I sat in my study in the Gold Coast brownstone I'd owned for 20 years, a glass of 30-year-old scotch untouched at my elbow, thinking about dark eyes that held no fear and a voice that had said no, as though it were the easiest word in any language. My younger brother Bruno found me there near midnight, still sitting in the dark, still turning over the encounter in my mind. "Dario said the translator didn't work out," he said, pouring himself a drink and settling into the leather chair across from my desk. At 53, Bruno served as my consigliere, my most trusted advisor. Where I was force and intimidation, he was strategy and subtlety. He also said she refused you. Actually refused. That true? Yes, Bruno whistled low. "Can't remember the last time someone did that. What did you offer her?" I told him. He whistled again. "And she still said no? This woman stupid or suicidal?" "Neither. Principled. Principles are expensive, Sal. Everyone sells them eventually." I took my first sip of the scotch, letting it burn down my throat. That's what I told her. She found it sad that I believed it. Bruno laughed, genuinely amused. "I like her already. So what now? We lean on her a little. Remind her what declining your generous offers might mean for her continued comfort in this city." The suggestion made something twist unpleasantly in my chest. The thought of threatening Elena Alves, of watching that quiet confidence turn to fear, of forcing her compliance through intimidation, felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. "No," I said firmly. "No pressure, no threats." "Then what? You just let it go? Except that Salvatore Vieira got told no by a translator living in Logan Square." I set down my glass and leaned forward, studying my brother's skeptical face. "Do you know what she did when I implied everyone has a price, Bruno?" She smiled, like I'd just revealed something embarrassing about myself, like my worldview was quaint. "So she's arrogant, all the more reason to—" "She's not arrogant. She's certain. There's a difference." I stood, moving to the window that overlooked the manicured garden behind my home. "When was the last time you met someone completely comfortable with who they are? Someone who doesn't need anything from you, doesn't want anything from you, doesn't fear you enough to pretend respect they don't feel?" "Never, I guess. That's kind of the point of the life we've built." "Exactly." I turned to face him. "Everyone in my orbit wants something or fears something. Elena Alves wanted nothing and feared nothing. Do you understand how rare that is? How refreshing?" Bruno studied me with growing concern. "Sal, you're not actually interested in this woman, are you? Because that would be complicated, I know." I returned to my desk, rolling the scotch glass between my palms. But I can't stop thinking about her, about the way she looked at me like I was just another person trying to sell her something she didn't want. No recognition of my name, no calculation about what knowing me might mean for her future. Just no. And you're attracted to that, to being dismissed. I'm attracted to authenticity, Bruno. I've spent 30 years surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear, who smile when they're afraid, who agree because disagreeing might be dangerous. Elena Alves told me the truth because that's who she is. She didn't care enough about my power to modify herself for my convenience. Bruno was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you going to do?" I smiled, feeling something I hadn't felt in decades, genuine uncertainty, the thrill of not knowing how something would unfold. "I'm going to go back." "And offer her more money?" "No. I'm going to ask her what she's working on. I'm going to listen. I'm going to show her that Salvatore Vieira can be interested in someone else's work without immediately trying to exploit it. You think that'll change her mind about the manuscript? I don't care about the manuscript anymore, I admitted, surprising myself with the truth of it. I'll find another translator for that. But Elena Alves, she's a completely different kind of project, one I'm very interested in pursuing. Bruno shook his head, a reluctant smile crossing his face. You're going to get your heart broken, old man. Woman like that, she's not impressed by what we've built. She'll probably refuse you 90 more times. Probably, I agreed, already planning my return to that third-floor walk-up with the forest green door. But I'm a patient man, Bruno, and I haven't been genuinely curious about another person in longer than I can remember. Elena Alves looked at me and saw nothing worth being afraid of. I want to know what she does see, what it would take for her to look at me and see something worth her time. And if she never does? I thought about that, about the very real possibility that Elena Alves would refuse me every single time I asked, would never compromise her principles, would never see me as anything more than an inconvenient interruption to her work. Then I'll have spent my time pursuing something genuine instead of something purchased, I said finally. That alone might be worth it. After Bruno left, I sat alone in my study until dawn, watching the sky lighten over Chicago, thinking about a woman who had refused me without a second thought, and somehow in that refusal had become the most interesting person I'd encountered in 30 years. I had built an empire on the principle that everything has a price. Elena Alves had just taught me, in the space of a 5-minute conversation, that perhaps the things worth having are precisely those that cannot be bought. On Wednesday morning, I had Dario drive me to a small Italian bakery I knew in Little Italy, where they made sfogliatelle the way my grandmother used to make them, crisp and flaky with ricotta filling sweetened just enough. I bought a dozen, still warm from the oven, and had them packaged in their simple white box tied with string. Then I had Dario drive me back to Logan Square, to that 3-story brick building with its weathered dignity, and I climbed those stairs again, carrying pastries and something that felt dangerously close to hope. This time when Elena opened the door, she was wearing reading glasses pushed up into her hair, a coffee cup in one hand, and an expression of genuine surprise. Mr. Vieira. I brought breakfast, I said, offering the white box. A peace offering. I was rude yesterday, arriving unannounced and assuming you'd be interested in my offer simply because the money was good. I apologize. She took the box automatically, her surprise deepening. You're apologizing. My mother raised me better than I showed yesterday. May I start over? Eleanor studied me for a long moment, her dark eyes searching my face for deception or manipulation. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she stepped back from the doorway. 5 minutes, Mr. Vieira. I have a deadline. I stepped into Elena Alves's world, and everything began to change. Elena's apartment was exactly what I should have expected, and nothing like what I'd imagined. The space was small, perhaps 600 square feet of living area, but every inch had been claimed with purposeful intention. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, organized by what I would later learn was language and era rather than author or subject. Portuguese texts occupied the wall nearest the window, their spines faded with age and handling. Latin manuscripts claimed the space above her narrow galley kitchen. Medieval French and Italian shared the wall opposite her desk. But it was her workspace that captured my attention completely. An antique wooden table, solid oak scarred with decades of use, dominated the main room, positioned to catch the northern light that poured through 3 tall windows. On its surface lay an organized chaos that spoke of deep concentration. A manuscript spread open beneath a glass weight, pages covered in her careful handwriting, reference books stacked within arm's reach, colored pencils for marking different types of annotations. The walls above her desk were covered with photographs, not of family or friends, but of illuminated manuscripts, architectural details from medieval churches, close-ups of calligraphy in scripts I couldn't identify. A corkboard held index cards covered in her handwriting, what looked like vocabulary lists and grammatical notes. "You can sit there," Elena said, gesturing to a worn armchair near the window as she moved to her small kitchen. Coffee, I was about to make a fresh pot. Please. I settled into the chair, noting how it faced her workspace, positioned for someone who wanted to observe her at work. A reading lamp arched over one arm, a stack of novels, contemporary fiction this time, not academic texts, sat on the side table. The sfogliatelle are from Nonna's, I said as she measured coffee grounds with the precision I was already recognizing as characteristic. My grandmother was Sicilian. She made them every Sunday morning. These are the closest I've found to hers. Elena glanced at the white box she'd set on her small counter. That's a very specific peace offering. I wanted to bring something that mattered, not just something expensive. She paused in her coffee preparation, looking at me directly. Why? Why what? Why do you care about making peace with someone who refused your business offer? Men like you, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Men with your kind of resources and influence don't usually accept no as a final answer. They find leverage. They apply pressure. They don't show up with pastries and apologies. I appreciated her directness, the way she didn't pretend ignorance about who I was. You're right. Usually I don't. But you're not a business proposition anymore. Ms. Alves, you're someone who made me think about things I haven't considered in a very long time. What things? Whether getting what I want is the same as getting what I need, whether power is the same as connection, whether being feared is the same as being known. Elena finished preparing the coffee, bringing two mismatched mugs, one clearly a souvenir from some academic conference, the other plain white ceramic, and settling into a chair across from me. She'd chosen the straight-backed wooden chair from her desk rather than sharing the comfortable seating area, maintaining professional distance. Those are unusually philosophical thoughts for someone in your line of work, she observed. What do you think my line of work is? I think you acquire things, property, influence, cooperation, through means that exist in the grey areas between legal and illegal. I think people do what you ask because refusing carries consequences. I think you're accustomed to operating in a world where leverage and fear are more valuable currencies than trust or genuine connection. That's remarkably accurate for someone who claims to know nothing about me. I didn't claim ignorance, Mr. Vieira. I claimed lack of interest in participating in your world. There's a difference. She sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim of her mug. Why are you really here? Because you said no, and that's so unusual it warranted a second visit? It's so unusual it made me curious about the kind of person who could say it, the kind of person who looked at a substantial sum of money and saw only the strings attached, who valued her integrity more than financial security. Elena smiled slightly, a genuine expression that softened her features. Financial security is a myth, Mr. Vieira. I learned that young. My parents died when I was 19. Car accident, sudden and stupid and wasteful. They'd spent their lives being secure, good jobs, retirement savings, health insurance, all of it meaningless in the face of a drunk driver running a red light. I learned then that the only thing you really own is who you are when no one's watching. Everything else can be taken away in an instant. I'm sorry about your parents. It was 15 years ago. I've made peace with it. She set down her mug. But it taught me to make choices based on who I want to be, not what I want to have. Your offer yesterday, taking it would have required me to be someone I'm not. Someone willing to compromise her principles for money. So I said no. It was actually very simple. Nothing about you is simple, Miss Alves. Elena, if you're going to keep showing up at my door with baked goods, we might as well use first names. Salvatore. Most people call me Sal. I think I'll stick with Salvatore, she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. It suits you better. More formal, more old world. We drank our coffee in companionable silence. I found myself noticing details I'd missed in my first visit, the way sunlight caught dust motes floating above her workspace, the faint smell of old paper and ink that permeated the apartment, the classical music playing so softly I hadn't initially registered it. What are you working on? I asked, nodding toward her desk. Helena's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. A 15th century Portuguese maritime log, a ship captain's personal journal from a voyage to West Africa. The Portuguese is archaic, full of nautical terminology that doesn't translate cleanly into modern language, and his handwriting is atrocious, but it's fascinating. You can see him grappling with the moral implications of the slave trade, trying to reconcile his Catholic faith with what he was being ordered to do. Ordered by whom? Portuguese nobility financing the expedition. They wanted gold and slaves. He wanted to map coastlines and document indigenous cultures. The tension is visible in every entry. She gestured to her notes. He never explicitly condemns the trade. That would have been too dangerous. But he finds ways to honor the humanity of the people he encounters, describes their family structures, their languages, their spiritual practices. It's subtle rebellion. You admire him. I admire his courage to document truth even when truth was dangerous, to maintain his integrity within a system designed to crush it. She met my eyes. Sound familiar? You think I'm like these Portuguese nobles, financing something morally questionable? I think you're like most powerful people throughout history, operating within systems that reward ruthlessness and punish compassion. The question isn't whether you're trapped in that system. It's whether you ever stop and question it. And you think I don't? I think you showed up yesterday trying to buy my cooperation without bothering to say, please. That suggests a man who's forgotten what it means to ask, rather than demand. The criticism should have angered me. Instead, I found myself smiling. You're right. I did forget. So let me try again. Elena, would you please tell me more about this ship captain and his impossible position? She studied me for a moment, clearly weighing whether my interest was genuine or manipulative. Whatever she decided must have been in my favor, because she stood and gestured for me to follow her to her desk. For the next hour, Elena walked me through her translation process, explaining how she cross-referenced nautical terminology, how she identified emotional subtext in formal language, how she built historical context around bare facts. She spoke with her hands when she was excited, gesturing to illustrate points, her whole body engaged in the act of explanation. I found myself genuinely fascinated, not by the manuscript itself, though it was interesting, but by watching Elena work, by seeing the precision of her mind and the passion she brought to honoring these centuries-old words. She wasn't just translating language, she was resurrecting a human being, giving voice to someone who'd been silent for 500 years. You love this, I observed when she paused to refill our coffee cups. Of course I do. Why else would I spend years getting a doctorate in medieval Portuguese literature? Why else would I live in this tiny apartment, translating obscure manuscripts for modest fees, when I could be teaching at a university for a steady salary? Why don't you teach, I mean? Elena leaned against her kitchen counter, cradling her fresh mug. Academia requires compromises I'm not willing to make. Publish or perish, department politics, competing for grants. I tried it for 2 years after finishing my doctorate, hated every minute except the actual research. So I left. Built this instead. She gestured around her book-lined apartment. It's small and uncertain, but it's mine. I answer to no one but the text itself. That's a luxury most people can't afford. It's a priority most people won't choose, she corrected. There's a difference. I live simply, keep my expenses minimal, take freelance work that interests me, and decline what doesn't. I have enough. That's more than most people can say. I thought about my Gold Coast brownstone, the expensive suits, the Mercedes waiting downstairs with Dario inside, all the markers of success I'd accumulated over 3 decades. Elena had just described it all as excess rather than achievement. You think I'm wasteful, I said. I think you've confused having things with being someone. Most people do. It's not a moral failing, Salvatore, it's just sad. You pity me. A little, she admitted. You came here yesterday trying to buy my cooperation because that's the only method of connection you remember. You came today with pastries because someone along the way taught you that gifts can be manipulative too. But you haven't yet figured out how to just be. How to be present with another person without an agenda. And if my agenda is simply to know you better, then you're still operating transactionally. I'll invest time and attention now so you'll give me something later. That's not connection, Salvatore. That's investment strategy. She was right, of course. Everything I did was calculated, measured against potential returns. Even this conversation, even my genuine fascination with her work, part of me was still thinking about what it might yield. How does one stop being transactional? I asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor smiled. You start by staying present in moments that serve no purpose, by having conversations that lead nowhere, by spending time with someone simply because you enjoy their company, not because you're working toward any particular outcome. Is that what this is? A purposeless conversation? It's starting to be. You asked about my work. I told you. You seemed genuinely interested. That's not transaction. That's just two people talking about something one of them finds fascinating. No agenda, no goal, just exchange. I looked at my watch, an old Rolex my father had given me, simple and elegant, and was startled to discover that 90 minutes had passed. I'd told Dario I'd be 15 minutes, 20 at most. I should go, I said, standing. I'm sure you need to get back to your captain's moral crisis. Probably. Deadlines wait for no one. Elena walked me to the door. Thank you for the sfogliatelle, Salvatore, and for asking about my work. Thank you for sharing it, for teaching me the difference between demanding and asking. I was halfway down the stairs when her voice stopped me. Salvatore? I turned to see her leaning over the railing, her dark hair falling forward over her shoulder. If you come back, and I suspect you will, bring questions, not gifts. Your attention is more valuable than your money. I drove back to my office with those words echoing in my mind, with the taste of good coffee and better conversation still on my tongue, with the unfamiliar sensation of having spent time doing absolutely nothing productive and feeling somehow enriched by it. Bruno found me that afternoon staring out my office window, neglecting the stack of documents that required my attention. How'd it go? He asked. She said my attention is more valuable than my money. Huh. That's either very wise or completely crazy. Both, I think. I turned from the window to face him. I'm going back Friday, same time. Why Friday? Because that gives me 5 days to think of good questions, to learn how to be present without agenda, to practice being someone worth her time. Bruno shook his head, but he was smiling. You've got it bad, old man. I've got it differently, am I corrected? For the first time in 30 years, I'm pursuing something I can't calculate or control. It's terrifying. And I can't wait to see what happens next. That Friday, I returned to Elena's apartment at 7 in the evening, when I knew the light would be fading and she'd be finishing her day's work. I brought nothing but myself and a question I'd spent all week considering. She answered the door in soft clothes, cotton pants and an oversized sweater, her hair damp from a recent shower, reading glasses still perched on her nose. Salvatore, right on time. You were expecting me? You're a man of patterns. I suspected you'd choose Friday evening. End of the work week, symbolic fresh start. Come in. Her apartment smelled of jasmine tea and the slightly musty scent of old books. She'd been working. Her desk showed evidence of intense concentration, papers spread in organized chaos. I have a question, I said as she poured us both tea from a ceramic pot. Just one. You had 5 days. One important one. When you look at me, what do you see? Elena considered this, settling into her chair with the same thoughtful precision she brought to her translations. I see a man who's forgotten how to want things he can't take. Someone who's built so many walls around himself that he's not sure anymore what he's protecting or from whom. I see loneliness disguised as power. The accuracy of her assessment stole my breath. That's harsh. You asked for honesty. I'm constitutionally incapable of anything else. What would it take for you to see something different? For you to become someone different? Not in grand gestures or dramatic changes, just in small, consistent choices to be present, to be honest, to want connection more than control. She sipped her tea. Why do you ask? Because I want to be someone you'd choose to spend time with. Not someone you tolerate or pity, but someone whose company you genuinely value. Then stop trying so hard. Stop calculating. Stop thinking about what you should say or do to impress me. Just be here. Talk to me about things that matter to you, not things you think I want to hear. So I did. I told her about my father, who'd built his small empire through violence and died young from its consequences, About my mother, who'd taught me that power was survival and love was weakness. About the 30 years I'd spent building something larger than my father's legacy, while slowly losing touch with everything that made life worth living. Elena listened without judgment, without advice, just present in that moment of honesty. And when I finished, she told me about her own ghosts, the parents she'd lost, the academic career she'd abandoned, the loneliness of choosing integrity over belonging. We talked until midnight, until the tea grew cold, and the city sounds outside her window shifted from evening bustle to night quiet. We talked about nothing that served any purpose, achieved any goal, moved toward any objective. We just talked. Two people, present in a moment that led nowhere except to the next moment. And when I finally left, walking down those familiar stairs to where Dario waited patiently in the Mercedes, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, the simple satisfaction of being known by another person, not feared, not obeyed, just known. "Same time next Friday?" Elena asked as I paused at her door. "If you'll have me." "Bring your questions, Salvatore. I'll bring the tea." It became our pattern. Every Friday at 7 I climbed those stairs to apartment 3B, and Elena opened her forest green door to let me into her world. We never made plans beyond the next Friday, never discussed where this was leading or what it meant. We just showed up, week after week, two people learning how to be present with each other. And slowly, week by week, I felt the walls I'd spent 30 years building begin to crack. By the 10th Friday, I had learned that Elena took her coffee black in the morning, but with honey in the afternoon, that she worked best in the hours just after dawn, when the city was quiet and her mind was fresh, that she spoke 4 languages fluently and could read 6 more, each one a window into a different way of seeing the world. I had learned that she was allergic to roses, but loved carnations for their spicy scent, that she'd never traveled outside the United States, despite dedicating her life to studying European manuscripts, that she dreamed in Portuguese sometimes, her sleeping mind so saturated with the language that it became her unconscious default. These small intimacies accumulated like interest, compounding into something I couldn't name, but felt growing with each passing week. Bruno noticed the change in me. So did Dario, though he was too professional to comment. I found myself distracted during business meetings, my mind wandering to Elena's book-lined apartment, wondering what manuscript she was translating, what historical figure she was resurrecting through her careful attention to centuries-old words. "You're different," Bruno observed one Tuesday afternoon, catching me staring out my office window instead of reviewing the quarterly reports he'd prepared. "Softer somehow, less sharp." Is that criticism? Observation. The question is whether it's dangerous. A soft man in our business doesn't survive long. I turned from the window to face him. "I'm 57 years old, Bruno. I've survived 3 decades in a world designed to kill or corrupt everyone who enters it. Maybe softness isn't weakness. Maybe it's what happens when you finally remember you're human. Philosophy now, she's really gotten to you. She's teaching me the difference between existing and living. There's a distinction I'd forgotten." Bruno studied me with concern. "You seeing her? Romantically, I mean?" "I'm seeing her every Friday. We talk, we drink tea. We exist in each other's presence without agenda or expectation. Is that romantic? I don't know. It's something. Though, something I haven't felt since, maybe ever. You know this can't end well. Woman like that, she's not built for our world. And you can't leave yours. Not really. The life we've built doesn't grant retirement. I'm aware of the complications, Bruno. I'm choosing to ignore them for now. To be present in what is rather than afraid of what might be." He shook his head. "You sound like a self-help book. It's unsettling." But he was right about the complications. Our worlds were fundamentally incompatible. Elena lived in deliberate simplicity, her integrity non-negotiable. I operated in moral grey areas, my wealth built on enterprises that existed in the shadows. Every Friday when I climbed those stairs to her apartment, I left behind the man people feared and tried to become someone she might respect. The division was becoming unsustainable. On the 15th Friday, I'd begun counting them like milestones. I arrived to find Elena visibly upset. She opened the door with red-rimmed eyes. her usual composure fractured. "What happened?" I asked immediately, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. "My landlord sold the building. New owner wants to convert it to luxury condos. I have 60 days to vacate." She gestured helplessly at the books lining every wall. 60 days to find a new place and move 15 years of accumulated research in this market, with my budget. My first instinct was to solve it, to buy the building myself, to find her a better apartment and pay the first year's rent, to use my resources to eliminate her problem. But I'd learned enough about Elena to know that solving her problems for her would be the worst possible response. "What do you need?" I asked instead. "I don't know. Time. Space. A miracle." She sank into her chair, looking around at her carefully organized world with devastation. "I built this, Salvatore. Every book positioned exactly where I need it, every reference within arm's reach. This apartment isn't just where I live, it's how I work, and I can't afford anything comparable in this city. I'll have to move to the suburbs, add commute time to my days, probably lose clients who need quick turnarounds." I sat across from her, fighting every instinct to fix this with money and influence. "Tell me what you're feeling. Angry, helpless, tired of being vulnerable to other people's decisions. The landlord who sold without warning his tenants. The new owner who sees us as inconvenient obstacles to profit. The whole system that treats housing as investment instead of necessity." She looked at me directly. "Your world, Salvatore. The world where everything is transaction and everyone is either profit or obstacle. That's not fair. Isn't it? You said yourself that you acquire things, that you operate in gray areas, that your business is built on leverage and fear. How is that different from what's happening to me right now? Someone with more power and resources deciding my life matters less than their profit margin." The comparison stung precisely because it was accurate. I had spent 30 years being the person with more power, the one making decisions that affected others without considering their humanity. Elena's crisis was a mirror reflecting the casual cruelty of my entire operating system. "You're right," I admitted quietly. "I am part of this system. I've benefited from it, perpetuated it, used it to build my empire, and I don't know how to separate myself from it without destroying everything I've built. I'm not asking you to destroy anything, Salvatore. I'm tired. Tired of struggling alone, tired of every bit of stability I managed to create being undermined by forces beyond my control." She wiped her eyes impatiently. "I'm sorry. You came here for our usual Friday conversation, and I'm dumping my problems on you." That's what this is, though, isn't it? Not just philosophical discussions, but actual life, actual struggles. You've shared your world with me for 15 weeks. Let me be present in the difficult parts, too. Elena smiled slightly through her distress. The student becomes the teacher. What would help right now? Not what can I fix for you, but what would help you feel less alone in this? She considered the question seriously. Help me make a plan. Not solve it for me, but think through options with me. Be another brain working on the problem instead of trying to make the problem disappear. So we spent that Friday evening not in philosophical conversation, but in practical problem solving. We calculated her budget, searched rental listings, made lists of what was essential versus what was merely preferred. We talked about storage options for books, about the possibility of a smaller workspace, about what she could sacrifice and what she absolutely needed. I contributed ideas, not solutions, asked questions rather than issuing directives, treated her crisis as a puzzle we were solving together rather than a problem I could eliminate with sufficient application of resources. It was harder than any negotiation I'd ever conducted. Every instinct screamed to simply buy her security, to remove the obstacle of money from her path. But Elena needed agency more than she needed rescue. She needed to find her own way, with support, but not substitution. At midnight, we'd developed a plan. Not a perfect plan, but a workable one. Eleanor would look for a smaller apartment further north, sacrifice some convenience for affordability. She'd invest in better organizational systems to maximize limited space. She'd build the same careful world she'd built here, just smaller, just different. "Thank you," she said, as I prepared to leave. Not for solving it, but for sitting with me while I solved it, for treating me like someone capable of handling her own life instead of someone who needed rescuing. That's what you've been teaching me, isn't it? How to be present without agenda. How to offer support without control. You're learning. She walked me to the door, then hesitated. Salvatore, can I ask you something personal? Always. Why do you keep coming here? Really? We're from completely different worlds. I have nothing to offer you. No access to power, no useful connections, no way to advance your interests. So why spend every Friday evening in this tiny apartment with a woman who translates dead languages? I looked at her, really looked at her, standing in her doorway with books rising behind her like ramparts, her dark eyes searching mine for honest answer. Because you're the only person in my life who sees me without fear. The only conversation I have all week that isn't tainted by calculation or motive. When I'm here, I'm not Salvatore Vieira who men fear and politicians court. I'm just a man, flawed and uncertain and trying to remember what it means to be human. You give me that gift every Friday. How could I not keep coming back? Something shifted in Elena's expression, a softening, a recognition. You're not what I expected either. What did you expect? A predator, someone who would eventually show his true nature, who would try to leverage our growing friendship into something transactional. But you haven't. 15 weeks, and you've never asked me for anything except my time, never pressured me to reconsider the manuscript translation, never tried to make this into something you could use. You've just shown up, week after week. Is that significant? It's unprecedented in my experience. Men usually want something from me. My expertise, my attention, my body, my validation. You seem content to simply exist in my space, to be known without being possessed. Maybe I'm learning that being known is enough. That connection doesn't require possession. Eleanor smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Then you're learning the most important lesson I have to teach, being present without grasping, wanting without taking, loving without owning. The word hung between us, loving, neither of us quite ready to examine what it might mean. Same time next Friday, I asked. Same time. And Salvatore? Thank you for seeing me clearly enough to know that solving my problems would be the worst way to help me. I carried those words with me down the stairs, into the Mercedes where Dario waited patiently, back to my Gold Coast brownstone with its expensive emptiness. That night I lay awake thinking about the difference between rescue and support, between solving and witnessing, between using my power to eliminate problems and using my presence to honor someone's agency in facing them. Elena was teaching me a completely different kind of strength, not the strength of dominance but the strength of restraint, not the power to control but the power to serve. It was the hardest education I'd ever undertaken. The next Friday, number 16, I arrived with a question I'd been afraid to ask. Elena let me in, poured tea, settled into our familiar pattern of presence and conversation. But I could feel the question pressing against my throat, demanding voice. What would you do if you didn't have to worry about money? I finally asked. If resources were unlimited, how would you structure your life? Eleanor considered this, her dark eyes distant with imagining. I'd travel, see the places I've only experienced through manuscripts, walk the streets of medieval Lisbon, touch the stones of Portuguese fortresses in West Africa, stand in the libraries where these texts were originally housed. I'd photograph architectural details, study regional variations in calligraphy, understand the physical context of the words I translate. What else? I'd teach, not in traditional academia with its politics and compromises, but informally. I'd mentor young translators, share what I've learned about honoring historical voices. I'd create space for people who love this work to learn it properly. She smiled. And I'd have a cat. I've always wanted a cat, but my landlord doesn't allow pets. That's all? Travel, teaching, and a cat? What else is there? A bigger apartment would be nice, I suppose. Better lighting for my workspace. But fundamentally, my life is already what I want it to be. I just want more security in maintaining it, more freedom to expand it. I don't need luxury, Salvatore. I need stability. The simplicity of her desires made my chest ache. In her position, Most people would have wanted wealth, status, the markers of success I'd spent 30 years accumulating. Elena wanted security to be herself, freedom to share what she knew, and a cat. If I could give you those things, you can't, she interrupted gently, because accepting them from you would change our dynamic, would make me someone who takes from you instead of someone who exists alongside you, would introduce obligation where now there's only choice. Do you understand the difference? I did, though it frustrated me. I had the resources to give Elena everything she wanted, the travel, the teaching space, the security, the cat. But giving them would transform our Friday evenings from genuine connection to transactional relationship, would make her someone indebted to me rather than someone who chose my company freely. How do people who care about each other navigate this? I asked. The practical reality that resources are unequal, that one person has the capacity to make the other's life easier? How do you offer help without creating obligation? Carefully, respectfully, with constant attention to agency and choice. Elena set down her tea. But Salvatore, we're not at that place yet. We're still learning each other, still figuring out what this is. Introducing material support now would corrupt something that's still very fragile. What is this? I asked. The question I'd been avoiding for 16 weeks finally spoken aloud. What are we doing here every Friday? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. I think we're learning how to want each other without consuming each other, how to be present without possessing, how to care without controlling. She met my eyes. I think you're teaching me that powerful men can choose gentleness, and I'm teaching you that some things worth having can't be taken. And if I want more than Friday evenings, more than philosophical conversations and careful distance, then you'll need to be patient, because trust like what you're asking for takes time to build, especially when the power imbalance between us is so significant. She paused. And because I'm not sure yet whether you want me or simply want something you can't have. The first time someone told you no and you've been fascinated by it ever since. But fascination isn't the same as love, Salvatore. It's just another form of appetite. Her words hit like physical blows. You think I'm here because you refused me? That this is just extended pursuit of something denied? I think it's part of your motivation. Maybe not all of it, but part. And until you can separate genuine care from the compulsion to possess, we need to maintain careful boundaries. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to prove that my feelings were more than acquisitive appetite. But Elena's clear-eyed assessment stopped me. How much of my fascination with her was genuine connection, and how much was simply the novelty of someone I couldn't control? You're right, I admitted. I don't know how to want someone without trying to possess them. It's the only model of relationship I've ever known. But I'm trying to learn something different, trying to become someone capable of caring without controlling. That's why I keep coming back, Elena, not to wear down your resistance, but to learn from your example how to be better than I've been. Then keep coming back, she said softly. Keep showing up without demands. Keep being present without agenda. Keep choosing restraint when every instinct screams for control. That's the work, Salvatore. That's how you become someone I could trust with more than Friday evenings. I left that night with more questions than answers, but also with a clear understanding of what was required. Elena wasn't playing hard to get. She was setting boundaries that honored both of us, protecting something fragile and important from the corrupting influence of power and possession. If I wanted more, and I was beginning to admit that I desperately wanted more, I would have to earn it through consistent demonstration that I could care without controlling, want without taking, love without owning. It was the hardest negotiation of my life, and the other party refused to be negotiated with. All I could do was keep showing up, week after week, learning how to be present without grasping, how to want without demanding, how to become someone worthy of Elena's freely given time. The education continued, Friday after Friday, lesson after patient lesson in how to be human. Winter settled over Chicago with the particular brutality the city is known for. Wind that cut through the thickest coat, snow that turned immediately to grey slush, cold that made even the short walk from car to building an act of endurance. I had Dario bring me to Elena's apartment every Friday regardless of weather, had him wait in the running car for hours while I climbed those familiar stairs. By the 30th Friday, our pattern had become essential to my week. Everything else, the business meetings, the negotiations, the careful maintenance of my empire, felt like filler between the moments when I could sit in Elena's book-lined apartment and simply be. I had learned more about her in those 30 weeks than I'd learned about anyone in my entire adult life. The way she chewed her lower lip when concentrating on a particularly difficult translation, the soft sound she made when discovering an elegant turn of phrase in medieval Portuguese, the careful ritual of her tea preparation, the precise temperature and steeping time she swore made all the difference. I had also learned the boundaries of her tolerance. She would share her intellectual life freely, her work, her thoughts on manuscripts, her fascination with historical figures whose voices she resurrected. But her emotional life she guarded carefully. Personal questions were answered with thoughtful brevity. Questions about past relationships deflected with gentle humor. Any inquiry that suggested I was trying to know her in order to possess her met with immediate withdrawal. "You're protecting yourself." I observed one particularly cold February evening after she'd neatly sidestepped my question about her longest relationship. "Of course I am. Wouldn't you in my position?" "What position is that?" Elena set down her tea, meeting my eyes directly. "A woman of modest means spending every Friday evening with one of the most powerful men in Chicago. A man accustomed to getting what he wants through whatever means necessary. A man who originally approached me with a transactional offer that I refused, but who hasn't stopped pursuing contact, despite that refusal." She paused. "From the outside, Salvatore, this looks like the long game. Patient predator wearing down careful prey." The assessment stung because I could see how it might appear that way. "And from the inside, what does it look like to you?" "More complicated. I believe your interest is genuine. I believe you're sincere in wanting to learn a different way of relating. But sincerity doesn't eliminate power imbalance. Genuine interest doesn't erase the fact that you could destroy my life with a phone call if I truly angered you. I would never—" "You say that now when I'm being agreeable, when I'm giving you what you want, my time, my attention, my conversation. But what happens when I refuse you something you really want? What happens when gentle pursuit stops working and your patience runs out? Will you still be this careful, respectful man? Or will you become the person you've been for 30 years, someone who takes what he wants, regardless of consent?" I stood and moved to her window, looking out at the snow-covered street below, at the Mercedes idling at the curb with Dario inside. "How do I prove to you that I won't? That I've changed, or am changing?" "You don't prove it with words, Salvatore. You prove it by staying present when things are difficult, by maintaining your restraint even when you're frustrated, by respecting my boundaries even when they inconvenience you." She joined me at the window. "And by accepting that some things can't be proven, only demonstrated through years of consistent behavior." "Years? Did you think 30 weeks of Friday evenings would undo 30 years of operating a certain way? Did you think wanting to change was the same as having changed? I thought I was making progress." "You are," she said, her voice softening. "Real, significant progress. You show up every week without demands. You listen instead of directing. You ask instead of assuming. That's extraordinary growth, Salvatore, but it's still early, still fragile, still untested in ways that matter. How do I get tested? What would it take for you to trust that this is real?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her breath fogging the cold window glass. "Time, consistency, and probably some kind of crisis that forces you to choose between what you want and what I need." I had no way of knowing that the crisis would arrive the very next week. Tuesday afternoon, Bruno entered my office with an expression I'd learned to recognize over decades, controlled concern masking significant problem. He closed the door before speaking, always a bad sign. "We've got a situation with the DeMarco family. They're pushing into territory we've controlled for 15 years. Aggressive moves, deliberate provocation. They're trying to force a response." I leaned back in my chair, immediately shifting into the mode I'd perfected over 3 decades. What kind of response are they expecting? Violence. They want us to escalate so they have justification for all-out war. They think we've gone soft, that you've lost your edge. Bruno's eyes narrowed. They're not entirely wrong. You've been distracted, unfocused. People have noticed. My business hasn't suffered. Not yet. But perception is reality in our world. If people think you've gone soft, they'll test you. And if you don't respond with appropriate force. He didn't need to finish. We both knew what happened to weak leaders in our world. What are my options? Limited. We can't let this stand. DeMarco is using a woman as his front, claims she runs a legitimate import business, but she's laundering money and moving product, operating out of a warehouse in Logan Square. My attention sharpened. Logan Square? Yeah, why? What's the address? Bruno consulted his notes. 2847 North Kedzie. Why does that matter? My stomach dropped. That was 3 blocks from Elena's apartment. 3 blocks from the neighborhood I'd been visiting every Friday for 30 weeks. Is there any indication DeMarco knows about my personal interests in that area? Understanding dawned in Bruno's eyes. You think he's targeting your translator, using her as leverage? I think it's a suspicious coincidence that he's operating in the exact neighborhood where I spend every Friday evening. A neighborhood I've never had business interests in before. Shit. Bruno sat down heavily. So what do? We can't ignore DeMarco's provocation. But if we respond with force in that neighborhood, your translator gets caught in the crossfire. At minimum, she'll know what you really are, what we really do. I stared at the papers on my desk without seeing them, mind racing through options and consequences. Every choice I made would reveal something to Elena. Responding with violence would prove her fears about me justified, that beneath the careful courtesy, I was still the predator she suspected. But failing to respond would show weakness my organization couldn't afford, would invite more aggression, would potentially endanger her more by suggesting she was leverage that worked. There's a third option, I said slowly. We respond, but not with violence. We outmaneuver instead of outmuscle, make DeMarco's operation unprofitable without any direct confrontation. How? His front woman is running a supposedly legitimate import business, so we make it actually legitimate. Flood the market with legal alternatives, undercut her prices, make her illegal side business unnecessary for her customers. Meanwhile, we quietly inform the relevant authorities about code violations, tax irregularities, all the bureaucratic obstacles that legitimate businesses have to navigate. We strangle the operation with red tape and competition instead of bullets. Bruno stared at me. That'll take months, cost us significant money, and it's not the strong response that re-establishes our reputation. No, it's a smarter response, one that achieves the same goal without collateral damage, without putting innocent people at risk. I met his eyes. Without forcing me to be the person I'm trying not to be anymore. This is about her, the translator. This is about the kind of man I want to be, Bruno, the kind of operation I want to run. We've spent 30 years using fear and violence because it was efficient. Maybe it's time to discover if there's another way. And if DeMarco interprets this as weakness, if others follow his lead, then we deal with that when it comes. But I'm not sacrificing who I'm trying to become to maintain a reputation built on who I used to be. Bruno stood shaking his head. You've changed, Sal. I'm not sure yet if it's for better or worse, but you've definitely changed. After he left, I sat alone in my office, understanding that I'd just made the choice Elena had predicted. Between what I wanted, the easy, violent solution that would have been my default response 6 months ago, and what she needed, even though she didn't know she needed it. I'd chosen the harder path, the one that might cost me reputation and money and influence, because the alternative would have destroyed whatever I was building with her. The test had come sooner than expected, and I'd passed, though at a cost I wouldn't fully understand for weeks. That Friday, I arrived at Elena's door with snow in my hair, and the weight of my decision still heavy on my shoulders. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. What happened? I wanted to tell her. Wanted to share the burden of the choice I'd made, the gamble I was taking with my organization's future, because I refused to let violence touch her neighborhood. But telling her would mean explaining my world in detail she deliberately avoided knowing. "Business complications," I said instead. "Nothing for you to worry about." Eleanor studied me with those dark, knowing eyes. "You're lying, or at least not telling me the whole truth. Some truths would burden you with knowledge you've carefully chosen not to have. I'm protecting you from details that would force you to be complicit in my world by making decisions about things that affect my neighborhood without telling me." I looked up sharply. "What do you know?" "I know there's been increased activity around the warehouse 3 blocks away. I know there are new faces in the neighborhood, people who don't quite fit. I know you've been distracted for the past 3 days, and I'm not naive enough to believe that's coincidence." She crossed her arms. "I also know you're trying to protect me from something. The question is whether that protection is for my benefit or yours." "Both," I admitted. "There's a situation developing. I'm handling it in a way that prioritizes civilian safety over efficiency. It's going to cost me, in money, in time, in reputation. But it means your neighborhood won't become a war zone. Because I live here. Because innocent people live here. Because the collateral damage of my usual methods would be unacceptable. Because—" I paused, weighing how much to reveal. "Because I'm trying to be someone who solves problems without creating casualties. Someone who deserves the trust you're carefully not giving me yet." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "What would you have done 6 months ago, before our Friday evenings?" I would have responded with overwhelming force. Quick, brutal, effective. The situation would have been resolved in a week with no ambiguity about my willingness to protect my interests. And now I'm trying something smarter but slower, less violent but more expensive. It might work, it might fail spectacularly and encourage more challenges to my authority. But at least I'll be able to look at you without seeing the violence I used to maintain my power reflected in your eyes. Something shifted in Elena's expression. She moved closer, studying my face with an intensity that made me feel exposed. "You're choosing the harder path because of me, because of what I might think of you. I'm choosing it because of who I want to become. You're just showing me who that is." She reached out then, for the first time in 30 weeks of Friday evenings, and touched my face. Her palm against my cheek, warm, despite the winter cold that clung to both of us. "Thank you. For choosing carefully. For protecting people you don't even know, because violence would make you someone you don't want to be." I covered her hand with mine, holding it against my face. "This is the test you mentioned, the crisis that forces me to choose between what I want and what you need. And you chose well, Salvatore. You chose to be the man you're trying to become instead of the man you've been. That matters more than you know." We stood that way for a long moment, her hand against my face, my hand covering hers, something fundamental shifting between us. Not possession, not consumption, just connection, freely offered and carefully received. "I should tell you," Elena said softly, "that choosing the harder path because it's right, that's more attractive than any amount of power or money could ever be. You're learning, Salvatore. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely learning." I turned my head slightly, pressing a kiss into her palm before releasing her. "And you're still keeping your careful distance, still protecting yourself from complete trust." "For now," she agreed, "but a little less distance than before, a little more trust earned. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was progress. Real progress, built on actual choices rather than pretty words." We spent that evening not in our usual conversation, but in comfortable silence, Eleanor working on a translation, while I sat in my accustomed chair reading a novel she'd recommended. The domesticity of it, being present in each other's space without needing to fill every moment with words, felt more intimate than any conversation we'd ever had. At midnight, when I prepared to leave, Eleanor walked me to the door as always. But this time, she didn't simply say goodnight. She stood on her toes and kissed my cheek, a brief press of lips against skin that sent warmth flooding through my chest. "Same time next Friday?" she asked. "Same time," I confirmed, my hand coming to rest briefly at her waist. "Always." The DeMarco situation took 3 months to fully resolve, exactly as Bruno had predicted. It cost us significant money and some reputation among those who valued quick, violent responses. But it also demonstrated that my organization could achieve goals through intelligence and strategy rather than fear and force. More importantly, it kept Elena's neighborhood safe, kept her world untouched by the darker aspects of mine, kept me from being the person she'd feared I would become when tested. Through those 3 months, I showed up every Friday at 7, and every Friday Elena's trust grew incrementally. She shared more of her emotional life, asked more personal questions, allowed more physical closeness, her hand in mine during conversation, my arm around her shoulders when she was tired, small intimacies that suggested walls lowering brick by careful brick. "You passed," she said one Friday in May, when Chicago had finally remembered that seasons other than winter existed. "The test I mentioned, you passed." What was the passing grade? Consistent demonstration that you'll choose carefully even when it costs you, that you'll protect people who can't protect themselves even when violence would be easier, that you're capable of growth and change. She smiled. "You've been showing me that for months now, Salvatore. At some point, I need to start believing the evidence." "And do you? Believe it?" "I'm getting there. Slowly, carefully, but genuinely getting there." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise of future intimacy, but it was acknowledgement that the work I'd been doing, the person I'd been trying to become, was visible to her, was real enough to earn incremental trust. For now, that was enough. By the 50th Friday, I had memorized the rhythm of Elena's breathing when she slept. She'd fallen asleep on her sofa one evening in late June, exhausted from a particularly demanding translation project, and rather than wake her, I'd simply sat in my accustomed chair and watched her chest rise and fall with the steady cadence of deep rest. Dario had texted twice asking if I was ready to leave. I'd ignored both messages, unwilling to disturb the trust implicit in Elena's unconscious vulnerability, that she felt safe enough in my presence to surrender to sleep, to be unguarded and defenseless while I kept watch. When she woke near midnight, blinking in confusion at the late hour, I was still there, reading by the small lamp, present but not intrusive, waiting without demand. "You stayed," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "I stayed. You were exhausted. I wasn't going to wake you just to observe social convention." She sat up, pushing her dark hair back from her face. "You could have left, locked the door behind you." "I could have, but I wanted to be here when you woke. Wanted you to know that I can be trusted with your vulnerability." Elena looked at me for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "Come sit with me." I moved from my chair to the sofa, settling beside her. She immediately curled into my side, her head against my shoulder, a casual intimacy we'd never shared before. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling the warm weight of her against me, hardly daring to breathe for fear of breaking the moment. "I'm 50 weeks into this," she said softly. 50 Friday evenings of you showing up without demands, being present without pressure, learning how to want without taking. Do you know how extraordinary that is? It's what you required, what you deserved. It's more than that. Most men would have given up after 5 weeks, decided I was too difficult, too demanding, not worth the investment of time and patience. But you've been here every single Friday, even when you were dealing with the DeMarco situation, even when you were exhausted from managing your business, even when I gave you nothing more than conversation and careful distance. She tilted her head to look up at me. Why? Because being here is the best part of my week, because learning who you are feels more important than anything else I do, because I'm 57 years old, Elena, and I've never wanted to know another person the way I want to know you, not to possess or control or use, but just to understand, to be present with, to care for in whatever way you'll allow. You're in love with me. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, completely irrevocably in love with you. Have been for months, though I've been trying not to burden you with it. That's why you never push, why you accept whatever boundaries I set without arguing. You're afraid that pressing for more would drive me away. Terrified of it, I admitted. I know how fragile this is, how easily I could ruin it by wanting too much too fast. So I've been trying to be patient, to let you set the pace, to prove through consistent action that I can be trusted with more when you're ready to give it. Elena shifted, sitting up to face me fully. And what if I'm never ready? What if 50 weeks becomes 100, becomes 1,000, and I still keep you at this same careful distance? How long would you wait? As long as you needed me to. As long as you kept opening your door on Friday evenings and letting me into your world. I'd wait forever for you, Elena, because these few hours every week where I get to be near you, to exist in your presence, to learn how to be better than I've been, they're worth any amount of patience. That's not healthy, Salvatore. That's not sustainable for either of us. Maybe not. But it's honest. And you've taught me that honesty matters more than strategy. She cupped my face in both hands, her dark eyes searching mine. You beautiful, patient, impossible man. You've spent almost a year learning how to love without possessing. Do you have any idea how rare that is, how precious? Are you saying, I'm saying I trust you? Finally, completely trust you. I've tested you in every way I could think of. I've maintained boundaries that would have broken most men's patience. I've given you every opportunity to show your true nature, to reveal the predator underneath the courtesy. And you haven't. You've just kept being present, kept being careful, kept choosing restraint when you could have chosen pressure. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain she could feel it. What does that mean, Elena? It means I'm ready for more, not everything, not all at once, but more. It means you've earned the right to closer proximity, to greater intimacy, to being someone I choose to build a life with instead of someone I carefully keep at Friday evening distance. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. 50 weeks of patient waiting, of careful restraint, of learning how to want without taking, all of it culminating in this moment where Eleanor was offering what I'd been afraid to hope for. Say something, she whispered. I don't want to rush you. Don't want you to feel pressured to give more than you're ready to give just because I've been patient. She laughed, a genuine sound of delight, still protecting my agency even when I'm offering what you want. That's exactly why I'm ready to offer it, Salvatore, because you'll never take more than I freely give. Never, I agreed. I promise you that. Whatever we build together, it will be at your pace, on your terms. Our pace, she corrected. Our terms. This isn't you accommodating me anymore. It's both of us building something together. She leaned forward, her forehead resting against mine. I love you too. I've been fighting it for months because loving someone with your power, your history, your potential for damage felt like terrible judgment. But you've proven that power can be wielded carefully, that history doesn't determine future, that potential for damage can be transformed into potential for protection. I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. Eleanor loved me. This extraordinary woman who'd refused me without hesitation, who'd taught me how to be human again, who'd required 50 weeks of patient demonstration before trusting me with her heart. She loved me. Can I kiss you? I asked, knowing that even now, especially now, I needed explicit consent. Yes, she breathed. Please, yes. I kissed her with 50 weeks of restrained desire behind it, with all the careful patience I'd learned, transformed into reverent attention. Her mouth opened beneath mine, her hands sliding into my hair, her body pressing close with an urgency that matched my own. But even in passion, I maintained awareness of consent, of boundaries, of her agency to stop at any point. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena smiled against my lips. Take me to dinner. I pulled back slightly, confused by the non sequitur. What? Take me to dinner. Tomorrow night. An actual date instead of Friday evening conversations in my apartment. I want to see what it's like to be courted by Salvatore Vieira in the actual world instead of this careful bubble we've created. Are you sure? Going public with our connection means my world starts to touch yours more directly. People will know you're important to me. That could bring complications. I'm sure. I've spent 50 weeks keeping careful distance from your public life. It's time to discover whether what we've built in private can survive in daylight. She traced my jawline with gentle fingers. Unless you'd prefer to keep me as your secret Friday evening companion, I would shout from every rooftop in Chicago that you've agreed to dinner with me. I just want to make sure you've considered the implications. I've considered everything, Salvatore. I've spent almost a year considering every possible angle and implication. Now I'm choosing to trust what we've built, to believe that you'll protect me from the worst aspects of your world while letting me be part of your actual life. She kissed me again briefly. Besides, you owe me 92 rejections worth of proper courtship. Time to start paying that debt. I laughed, joy flooding through me. 92? I counted. Every Friday you came here, every time I maintained boundaries that kept this from becoming romantic, every week you accepted my terms without argument. 92 times I essentially refused to be courted. Now I'm ready. So, court me properly, Salvatore Vieira. Show me what you've been holding back all this time. The next night I picked Elena up in the Mercedes, not to hide our connection but to show her the full reality of my life, including the security that was now permanent fixture. Dario opened the door for her with careful respect, having been thoroughly briefed on how valuable this woman was to me. Elena wore a simple black dress that somehow managed to be more elegant than the designer gowns I was accustomed to seeing at expensive restaurants. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she'd applied minimal makeup that enhanced rather than concealed her natural beauty. "You're stunning," I said, as she settled into the leather seat beside me. "You're biased, but thank you." I took her to a small Italian restaurant in River North, family-owned, impeccable food, and nothing ostentatious about its elegance. The kind of place where quality mattered more than flash, where the pasta was handmade and the owner's grandmother's recipes were treated as sacred texts. The owner, Giuseppe, greeted me warmly but with clear curiosity about my companion. I'd never brought a woman here before, had always dined alone or with business associates. Elena's presence was noteworthy. "Giuseppe, this is Elena Alves. Elena, Giuseppe Moretti. His family has been making the best pasta in Chicago for 3 generations. 2 generations, Giuseppe corrected with a smile. My son refuses to learn, says he's going to be a lawyer instead. He shook Elena's hand warmly. Any woman who can convince Salvatore to smile like that is welcome in my establishment. Your usual table? He seated us in a quiet corner, brought wine I hadn't ordered but knew I'd want, left menus but suggested we let him choose our courses. It was the kind of service that came from decades of relationship, from being more than just customer and owner. "He likes you," Elena observed after Giuseppe retreated to the kitchen. "I helped his family once, when developers were trying to force them out of this location. Reminded certain people that this restaurant was untouchable." I smiled slightly. "One of the few times I've used my influence for something entirely good. You do that more than you admit. The hospital wing you donated, the scholarship fund, the protection you extend to businesses in your territory that treat their workers fairly." I looked at her in surprise. "You researched me." "Of course I did. You researched me before our first meeting. Seemed only fair to understand who I was spending my Friday evenings with." She sipped her wine. "You're more complex than your reputation suggests, Salvatore. Capable of great violence, certainly, but also capable of great generosity. You exist in grey areas, morally speaking." "Does that bother you? It complicates you, makes you harder to categorize as simply good or simply bad. I've decided I prefer complicated truth to simple fiction." She reached across the table, taking my hand. "I'm not naive about who you are, about what you've done and continue to do, but I also see who you're trying to become. Both things can be true simultaneously. I don't deserve you, maybe not, but you've earned the chance to try. That's all anyone can ask for." We talked through multiple courses, the conversation flowing as easily as it did in her apartment, but with the added pleasure of being seen together in public, of not hiding our growing connection. I found myself relaxing into a version of public presence I'd never accessed before, not the feared business leader or the powerful crime boss, but simply a man having dinner with a woman he loved. Other diners noticed, of course. Salvatore Vieira dining intimately with an unknown woman was noteworthy enough that I saw phones being discreetly aimed our direction, saw whispered speculation at nearby tables. By tomorrow, word would have spread through my entire network that I had someone important in my life. The implications of that would be complicated, would make Elena a potential target for anyone wanting to hurt me. would require increased security measures, careful management of her exposure. But she'd chosen this, understanding the risks, trusting me to protect her while respecting her autonomy. After dinner, instead of having Dario drive us directly back to her apartment, I asked if she'd like to walk along the river. It was a warm summer night, the city's lakefront bustling with evening activity, and I wanted to extend our time together for as long as she'd allow. Elena agreed, and we walked hand in hand along the riverwalk, Dario and another security man maintaining discreet distance. It felt almost normal. Just two people enjoying the evening air, watching boats drift past on the dark water, stealing kisses when the mood struck. "This is what I wanted," Eleanor said, leaning against the railing to watch the city lights reflect in the river. "To know you in the actual world, not just in the careful space we created. To see whether the man who shows up on Friday evenings is the same man who exists in his regular life. And you're more guarded out here, more aware of watching eyes, more conscious of your reputation and image, but fundamentally the same." She turned to face me. "The man who listens when I talk, who asks before assuming, who treats me like someone valuable rather than something owned. He exists here too." "I'm trying to be that man always, not just for you." "I know. I can see it in how you treated Giuseppe, how you interact with Dario, how you move through the world with slightly less sharp edges than you used to. You're changing, Salvatore. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely changing." I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her waist. "Because of you, because you showed me what I was missing, what I'd traded away in building my empire. I was the catalyst, maybe, but you're doing the work. That's what matters." We stayed there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the city we both loved from different perspectives. Elena's Chicago was books and translation and careful scholarship. Mine was power and influence and carefully managed fear. But in this moment, standing on the riverwalk with the woman I loved in my arms, our Chicagos overlapped. When I finally drove her home, I walked her to her door as I'd done 92 times before, but this time, when she invited me in, it wasn't for tea and conversation. "Stay," she said simply. "Not for anything more than I'm ready to give. But stay. Sleep beside me. Let me wake up tomorrow knowing you're still here." I stayed. We lay in her narrow bed, fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms. I listened to her breathing slow and deepen as she fell asleep against my chest, felt the trust implicit in her vulnerability, understood the gift she was giving me, not her body, not yet, but her presence through the night, her willingness to be unguarded while I kept watch. I barely slept, unwilling to miss a moment of having her close, of breathing in the scent of her shampoo, of feeling her heartbeat steady against mine. This was what I'd been waiting for through 92 patient Fridays, not possession or consumption, but simple presence, freely offered and carefully received. When dawn light filtered through her curtains, Elena stirred, blinking awake to find me watching her. "You're still here," she murmured. "I'll always be here when you want me. For as long as you want me." She smiled, sleepy and content. "Then I think you're going to be here a very long time, Salvatore Vieira." It was the most beautiful promise I'd ever received. The 93rd Friday arrived 2 years after the first. 2 years of patient waiting, of careful restraint, of learning how to love without possessing. 2 years of watching Elena's trust grow brick by brick until the walls between us had transformed from barriers into bridges. In those 2 years, our lives had intertwined in ways I'd never imagined possible. Elena had moved to a larger apartment, one she'd found and chosen herself, though I'd quietly ensured the building was secure and well-maintained through channels she didn't need to know about. Her books still lined every wall, her workspace still commanded the best light, but now there was space for me too. A comfortable chair that had become mine, a drawer in her dresser for the clothes I kept there, a second key that hung on my keyring alongside the ones that opened my various properties. I hadn't moved in, precisely, but I spent more nights in her bed than in my own, my body curled protectively around hers, our breathing synchronized in sleep. Dario had long since stopped questioning the hours I kept, had become accustomed to driving me to Logan Square more often than to my Gold Coast brownstone. My business had evolved too. The DeMarco situation had taught me that intelligence could be more effective than intimidation. That strategy could achieve what violence had accomplished, but at lower cost, both moral and practical. I still operated in grey areas, still wielded power that came from fear and influence, but I'd found ways to be more surgical, more careful, more mindful of collateral damage. Bruno attributed the changes to Elena's influence, and he wasn't wrong. Knowing her, loving her, being accountable to someone whose respect I desperately wanted to maintain, it had reformed my decision-making in fundamental ways. I still did things she wouldn't approve of, but I did fewer of them, and with greater consideration for consequences beyond my immediate interests. "You're domesticated," Bruno observed one Thursday afternoon, catching me checking my watch for the third time in an hour. "Can't even focus on business meetings anymore because you're thinking about tomorrow night. Friday evenings are important to me." "Friday evenings are your entire life now. You realize that, right? Everything else, the business, the meetings, the careful management of your empire, it's all just filler between the moments you get to be with her." Is that criticism? Observation? You're happier than I've ever seen you. Also more vulnerable. Anyone who wants to hurt you now knows exactly where to apply pressure. The concern was valid. In 2 years, Elena had become my most significant weakness, the leverage point that could compromise every defense I'd built. I'd increased security around her, without her full knowledge, had people watching her building, had resources allocated to ensuring her safety that she'd probably find invasive if she knew about them. "She's worth the vulnerability," I said. "I hope so, because if anything happens to her, it'll destroy you." I knew he was right, knew that loving Elena had fundamentally altered my risk calculation, had introduced an element of uncertainty into my carefully controlled life that I couldn't eliminate or manage. But the alternative, living without her, returning to the hollow existence I'd maintained before those first Tuesday afternoon, was unthinkable. That Friday evening, I arrived at her apartment at 7, as always, but this time I brought something I'd been planning for months, a small velvet box that weighed almost nothing, but represented everything. Eleanor opened the door in casual clothes, soft pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd been working, I could tell by the ink smudges on her fingers and the intense focus that still lingered in her expression. "Salvatore," she said, smiling in welcome. "You're early. I'm exactly on time, 7 o'clock. My watch must be slow then." She stood on her toes to kiss me, a greeting ritual we'd developed, her lips soft and familiar against mine. "Come in. I just finished a particularly tricky passage. Want to hear about it?" "Always, but first I have something for you." I followed her inside, noting the small changes since my last visit 2 days ago. Fresh flowers in the vase on her desk. Carnations. She still loved carnations. A new stack of books from the antiquarian shop she frequented. The subtle rearrangement of furniture that suggested she'd been restless, thinking while she worked. Eleanor settled into her accustomed chair, looking at me with curious attention. "What is it?" I sat across from her, the velvet box heavy in my pocket. My heart was pounding with a nervousness I hadn't felt since adolescence, since before I'd learned to control my emotional responses through force of will. 2 years ago, I began, you opened your door to a man who was trying to buy your cooperation, who thought everything had a price and everyone could be purchased or pressured into compliance. You saw through that immediately, refused me without hesitation, taught me that some things, some people exist outside the transactional logic I'd spent my entire adult life mastering. Elena's expression softened. "You've told me this story before." "I know. But I need you to understand what it meant. What you've meant. Before you I was powerful but empty, feared but not known. I'd built an empire at the cost of my humanity, and I didn't even realize what I'd lost until you showed me what life could be when someone sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. Salvatore, let me finish, please." I took a deep breath. "You've spent 2 years teaching me how to love without possessing, how to want without taking, how to be present without agenda. You've required patience I didn't know I was capable of. You've set boundaries that forced me to become better than I've been. You've given me the gift of being known, truly known, by another person. I pulled the velvet box from my pocket, but didn't open it yet. Just held it, this small container of my hopes and fears. I know I'm not what anyone would choose for you. I'm too old, too morally compromised, too entangled in a world you've deliberately avoided. I know that loving me brings complications and dangers you never asked for. I know I can never be the simple, safe choice. You're not simple or safe, Elena agreed quietly. You're also brave and thoughtful and capable of extraordinary growth. You're a man who shows up every single week for 2 years because you promised you would, who chooses restraint when pressure would be easier, who protects people who can't protect themselves even when it costs you. You're complicated and difficult, and absolutely worth the complications. I opened the box. Inside was a simple platinum band. No ostentatious diamond, no flashy display of wealth, just elegant metal that would sit comfortably on her hand without interfering with her work, without announcing ownership or possession. Elena Alves, will you marry me? Will you choose to build a life with me, on your terms, at your pace? Will you let me spend whatever years I have left, learning how to be worthy of the trust you've given me? She stared at the ring, then at me, her dark eyes shining with tears. You beautiful, patient, impossible man. Do you know how many marriage proposals I've refused in my life? I don't, actually. 5. 5 different men who thought that because they wanted me, I should want them back, who offered marriage like it was a promotion I should be grateful to receive, who never asked what I wanted, only assumed my answer. She reached out, taking the box from my hands. You're the first person who's ever asked like it was a real question, like my answer might actually be no, and that would be acceptable. Your answer might be no, that would be devastating, but acceptable. I'll wait longer if you need me to. I'll keep showing up on Friday evenings for another 2 years, another 10 years, however long it takes for you to be sure. Salvatore, shut up. I fell silent, watching as Elena lifted the ring from its velvet nest. She studied it carefully, the way she studied manuscripts, looking for meaning in every detail. It's simple, she observed, like you prefer. Nothing ostentatious. Nothing that would interfere with your work. Practical. Thoughtful, I hope. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, because I'd carefully measured her size months ago, planning this moment with the same attention to detail I brought to everything involving her. The platinum caught the afternoon light streaming through her windows, elegant against her olive skin. Yes, she said simply. I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you. Yes, I choose you, complications and all, because you're the only man who's ever seen loving me as a privilege to earn rather than a right to claim. She smiled through tears. Also because you do the dishes without being asked, and you've read every book I've ever recommended, and you remember that I like honey in my afternoon tea. I crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, pulling her into my arms, kissing her with 2 years of patient wanting finally allowed to express itself fully. She kissed me back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in my shirt, her body pressed close against mine. I love you, I murmured against her lips. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too, even though you're bossy and overprotective and impossibly stubborn. Those are features, not bugs. She laughed, the sound bright with joy. That's exactly what I'm agreeing to marry, a man who thinks his worst qualities are actually strengths. We sank onto her sofa together, Elena curled against my side, both of us staring at the ring on her finger, like it might disappear if we looked away. The late afternoon light slanted through her windows, illuminating dust motes and book spines and the woman I loved, all rendered golden and precious by the quality of the light. When did you know? Elena asked. When did you know you wanted to marry me? I considered the question carefully. There wasn't one moment, it was cumulative. Every Friday evening when you let me into your world, every conversation that made me think differently about who I am and who I want to be, every boundary you set that forced me to become better, every small intimacy you allowed as your trust grew, all of it accumulating until one day I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life showing up for you. learning from you, being someone worthy of your love. That's a long engagement period. Most people propose after a few months, not 2 years. Most people haven't spent 2 years learning that the best things can't be rushed. That trust builds slowly. That some questions need time before they can be honestly asked. Elena twisted to look up at me. What changed? Why ask now instead of waiting longer? Because I finally believe I deserve you, not because I've become perfect. I'm still morally complicated, still operating in gray areas, but because I've proven to myself that I can be the man you need me to be, that I can choose carefully when it matters, that I can love without consuming. I traced her jawline gently. I've spent 2 years being tested by life and by you, and I've passed enough tests to earn the right to ask. What if you fail future tests? What if you make mistakes? Then we'll work through them together, because that's what marriage is, not finding someone perfect, but finding someone whose imperfections you're willing to accept while they work on becoming better. You've already accepted mine. Now I get to spend our lives working on deserving that acceptance. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers playing with the ring. My work will always be important to me. I won't give up my translations, my research, my identity, to become just someone's wife. I would never ask you to. Your work is part of who you are. I'm marrying all of you, not just the parts that are convenient for me. I'll need space sometimes, solitude, hours where I'm focused on manuscripts and not available for conversation or connection. I know. I've spent 2 years watching you work. I understand the depth of concentration your translations require. I won't move to your Gold Coast brownstone, won't play hostess to your business associates, won't become ornamental decoration for your public life. I wouldn't want you to. We can live wherever you're comfortable. We can keep our relationship as private as you need it to be. You say that now, but marriage changes things, introduces expectations from other people about how we should be, how we should present ourselves. I took her face in my hands, making sure she could see the sincerity in my eyes. Elena, I've spent 2 years learning that your terms are non-negotiable. That loving you means accepting every boundary you set. That has not changed and will not change because of a ring. We'll build our marriage exactly the way we've built our relationship. With you setting the pace, with me following your lead, with both of us choosing each other freely every single day. You're giving me all the power. I'm giving you all the respect you deserve. There's a difference. She kissed me then, deeply, thoroughly, with a passion that suggested our engagement had shifted something fundamental. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, she smiled against my lips. I should cook you dinner, celebrate properly. I should take you out, somewhere elegant and expensive where I can show off my fiancé. Or, she said, standing and tugging me toward her small kitchen, we could stay here, make something simple together, spend our first evening as an engaged couple the same way we've spent every Friday for 2 years, present with each other, agenda-free, just being. I followed her into the kitchen, watching as she pulled ingredients from her refrigerator with practiced efficiency. We'd cooked together before, had developed an easy rhythm of shared space and collaborative creation, but tonight it felt different, charged with new meaning. "What are we making?" I asked, tying on the apron she handed me, a ridiculous thing covered in Portuguese phrases that I'd learned to read during our time together. "Pasta, simple carbonara, the kind your grandmother would approve of." My grandmother would have loved you. Because I cook Italian food, because you refuse to compromise yourself for anyone. She was like that, fierce and unbreakable. My grandfather spent 60 years earning her respect every single day. Elena paused in her preparation, looking at me with sudden understanding. "Is that what this is? You following in your grandfather's tradition of patient courtship?" "Partly. Also blazing my own trail. My grandfather never had to unlearn violence and control. Never had to transform himself from predator to partner. That's my particular challenge." We cooked in comfortable silence, the easy collaboration of 2 people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Elena diced pancetta while I grated parmesan. I boiled water while she whisked eggs. We moved around each other in her tiny kitchen with practiced grace, our bodies knowing where the other would be, anticipating movements before they happened. "This is what I want," Elena said as we sat down to eat, simple pasta and salad. Wine I'd brought weeks ago and left in her cabinet. This simple domesticity, this easy partnership, not grand gestures or expensive displays, just us showing up for each other in ordinary moments. Then that's what our marriage will be, every day. We talked through dinner about practical matters, when to tell Bruno, how to manage the public announcement, whether to have a ceremony or simply file paperwork. Elena wanted small and private. I wanted whatever made her happy. We negotiated with the same careful respect that had characterized our entire relationship, each of us yielding to the other's priorities, neither of us demanding or controlling. After dinner, we washed dishes together, another ritual we'd developed, her washing while I dried. The normality of it, the domestic simplicity, felt more profound than any grand romantic gesture could have been. This was what I'd been waiting for through 93 patient Fridays, not fireworks or drama, but simple partnership, freely chosen and carefully maintained. "Come to bed," Elena said when the kitchen was clean, taking my hand and leading me toward her bedroom. "Not for anything you're not ready for, but because I want to fall asleep as your fiancé and wake up tomorrow still wearing this ring." We lay together in her bed, fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms, exactly as we'd done hundreds of times before. But now, with the weight of commitment between us, the knowledge that this was no longer temporary or uncertain, but a conscious choice to build something permanent. "I never thought I'd do this," Elena murmured against my chest. "Never thought I'd meet someone worth compromising my solitude for. Worth the complications of commitment. Worth it? So worth it. Because you compromise too. You meet me where I am instead of demanding I come to where you are. That's the difference between possession and partnership." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. 2 years ago, I would have said that 93 rejections, even spread over 2 years, would have broken my patience, would have proven the futility of pursuit. And now? Now I understand that those 93 times weren't rejections. They were invitations to grow, to become someone worthy of the 93rd Friday, when you finally opened the door all the way and invited me fully into your life. Elena lifted her head to look at me, her dark eyes soft in the dim light. "You know what the best part is? I'm not settling. I'm not compromising my standards or lowering my expectations. You actually became the man I needed you to be. That's extraordinary. You made me extraordinary, showed me what I was capable of when I stopped trying to control everything and started trying to understand it. We made each other extraordinary," she corrected. "That's how this works. 2 people choosing to grow together, to be better together than they could be apart." As Elena's breathing slowed and deepened in sleep, I lay awake thinking about the improbable journey that had brought us here, from a Tuesday afternoon rejection to a Friday evening proposal, from a woman who wouldn't sell her integrity to a man who learned that integrity was worth more than any empire. I had built my life on the principle that everything has a price, that everyone can be bought or pressured into compliance. Elena Alves had taught me, through 93 patient weeks of Friday evenings, that the things most worth having are precisely those that cannot be bought, only earned, only freely given, only offered when trust has been built brick by careful brick. 2 years of patient waiting, 2 years of learning how to love without possessing, 2 years of becoming someone worthy of this extraordinary woman's freely given heart. It had been worth every second, every test, every moment of restraint when my instinct screamed for control. Because on the 93rd Friday, Eleanor had finally opened her door all the way, and I had walked through it not as a predator claiming territory, but as a partner choosing commitment. As a man who had learned, at 57 years old, that the most profound power is not the power to take, but the power to wait, to be present, to become worthy, to love without owning, and to be loved in return, freely and fully, by someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. That, I had finally learned, was worth any amount of patience.